Welcome back to Storytime with Nat. I'm Natalie, your storyteller. Today we have some sweet justice served up in the form of ProRevenge. This first story comes from Maximum Power and is titled Metered On-Ramps. Back when metered on-ramps were first installed on the main highway in my town in Oregon, the interval between lights on the ramp I used daily was 15 seconds. Cars would be backed up onto the adjacent feeder streets, and you could be stuck for 15 to 20 minutes on the ramp. Took a bit of research to find out that it wasn't the city or county, but ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, that controlled them. After repeated complaints and no action, I finally got the names of the two ODOT traffic engineers responsible for setting the light intervals. I made numerous voicemails and finally had one discussion, but still no fix to the issue. Well, back in the day, early 2000s, we still had phone books, and both these engineers had listed home phone numbers. I got a 4x8 piece of plywood and painted and lettered it. Tired of these idiotic ramp lights? Call the ODOT engineers responsible for them. Dennis, the phone number. Bill, the phone number. And let them know what you think. I stood with it on the side of the ramp for 2 days, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. The next day, I get a call from one of them, don't remember which, begging me to stop. I said, fix the freaking lights. You'll stop with the sign? Fix the freaking lights. Okay. The very next day, they had a survey crew out there in the afternoon to count cars, and the day after that, the lights were reset to 3 seconds between cars. Bottom line, when dealing with the government, until those personally responsible are held accountable in a manner that inconveniences or scares them, they will continue to abuse the public, whether from negligence, incompetence, or malice. But bring it home to them and they will, grudgingly, change their ways. That's a great story of taking matters into your own hands. We've all been in those frustrating situations, wishing we could change things. But this guy actually went and did it. I do feel bad for the guys in charge of setting the timers. They are probably just overworked government employees and didn't deserve to have their personal numbers called. What do you guys think? Did he go too far on this one? This next story is titled, Landlord Screwed with the Wrong Tenant for Too Long. This will be decently long as it needs some context. I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff to make it all easier to understand as well. Minor details might not be entirely accurate as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city, as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think of a courtroom. In a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18, 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always read, inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks, and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or 2 late, but we'll always have it by the 3rd at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from the landlord because even if we're often a day or 2 late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day, but now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I complained to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding 1st of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15-20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that, and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story, though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at garbage pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kinda exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the 1st month, but I did the 2nd, so I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves, so I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20 odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them. Once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower. I had so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end I thought he'd have a heart attack. I don't know why there are so many scummy landlords out there. Like, to be a landlord, you are already winning at life. You own someone else's home, the place they sleep and eat and live their lives. Landlords have a huge responsibility to take care of the place and act reasonably. To not provide basic things like a water heater for 6 months is outrageous. I'm glad OP got revenge on this. It seems like if the landlord would have been a bit flexible, he wouldn't have had to go through all this. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a great day. Love you all.